This is Kevin, and he's about to find out how expensive flutes are.
You need $1,000 for a Yamaha flute?
Yep, you do. But what if, like Kevin, your budget's less than $1,000? 10 times less. Can you even buy a brand new flute with a budget of just 100 Australian dollars? And if you can, would it be any good, or are you better off rolling the dice on the used market? I was actually feeling rather confident, but this ended up being much more difficult than I was expecting. The rules of today's challenge are simple. $100 budget, I have to buy the best brand new flute I can, shipping, tax, all included. Then I have to go and do the same with a used flute, but with one extra little twist. I don't need to buy a working flute. I can fix up an old broken one. And any household tools or materials or things you could borrow from a DIY friend, I can use those completely free. But specialized flute tools and materials, they come out of our measly $100 budget. So let's buy some flutes, shall we? My first problem was immediate, trying to buy a brand new flute for under $100. I started on Amazon, but I couldn't find anything in budget. AliExpress? Nope, the cheapest flute I could find on the entire website was just a little too expensive. I checked every site I could think of. Nothing had anything available for under $100. But I wasn't going to be defeated that easily. So I did what any good deal hunter does and waited, because I had a plan. AliExpress had given us the closest option by far, so I decided to wait for their traditional 11/11 sale, and my waiting was rewarded with not one but 2 coupon codes, bringing our total down to $79.86 Australian, including shipping and tax. With our new flute secured, how do we fare in the used market? Unlike buying a new flute, the used market genuinely had a few options available under $100, but good ones? That was trickier. Not only did I want a flute that was functional, I also realistically needed one substantially under budget. Every dollar I save here is a dollar I get to spend fixing any issues that crop up, and I desperately needed that extra budget to shield me from any unpleasant surprises. So I employed tactic number 1. Haggling. I picked my target at a local pawn shop. This buffet crampon flute. It's an old flute and quite heavily tarnished, but from what I could see of the pads in the photos, it looked good. And it carried a 90-day warranty, a good backup in case anything did go wrong with it. Yet, this same model was available a little cheaper and in better condition at another cashie's. So I sent in a message asking if they could bring down the price just a little bit. And I was ghosted. I had originally hoped to pick up something good and undervalued on an eBay auction, but I just wasn't seeing anything. So I decided to fall back with a tried and tested plan. Waiting. Whoa, wait a minute. I had a bite. 3 eBay auctions, each with solid looking options. A Boozy and Hawkes region, an old Emerson, and a Nikon FL23. A Nikon. This one was of particular interest to me. Nikon is a brand that few people have heard of, yet they weren't a bad brand, far from it. In fact, they would later go on to be acquired by Yamaha and become their wind department. So this was, in a way, just a really old Yamaha. Slight problem, it's for parts or repair. But then the other options were from op shops who definitely hadn't properly tested their flutes. And unlike the op shop listings, the Nikon accepts returns. So if after receiving it, I believed it was damaged beyond my ability to repair, I could send it back and have another go. I went for it. Several days later, I won the auction, paying $65.48 including shipping, leaving just $34.52 to get it to a working condition. And here is the cheapest new flute on the internet.
Opening the AliExpress flute immediately gave me deja vu to the time I compared a fake AliExpress Senkyo to a real one, and I was expecting to see many of the same issues present on the last AliExpress flute to be on this one too, but I couldn't have been more wrong. The keys were soldered far better, and the pads, well, definitely not good, were significantly less atrocious on this flute, despite it costing half the price of the Senkyo knockoff we looked at last time. However, this one had other issues instead. Its tuning isn't particularly great, and besides the tuning, the lower second octave is weirdly resistant and easy to overblow, especially F sharp. Some of the notes also had an oddly bright sounding airiness that I found very hard to get rid of, and the headroom cork was out of alignment.
This flute isn't particularly good. I feel like if we can get our used flute working, it will be able to beat this, but that isn't a sure thing. And this is our used flute.
Immediately upon opening up our used flute, it seemed like someone had tried to take it apart and reassemble it at some point, but had messed it up. No matter, that's easy to solve. But what wouldn't be so easy was this. Our D sharp and G sharp pads had been eaten by pad bugs.
Replacing pads is going to be really difficult on our puny budget. I live in the middle of nowhere, and while pads themselves aren't particularly expensive, shipping them from any of the reputable stores in the States or in Europe is going to really kill our budget. This now meant that I had to be lean as possible with the rest of my budget. But our flute still had 3 other major issues that needed solving.
First, it was Allergen City and ridiculously dusty. Second, all of the corks that had kept the mechanism properly adjusted were gone or disintegrating. And third, the mechanism was old, gummed up, and filthy, in desperate need of some good lubrication. Our first task, at least, was going to be easy, if not entirely pleasant, giving this flute a much needed clean out.
Now, I did not want to use water. While it isn't uncommon for flutes to receive wet treatments, especially being cleaned in an ultrasonic cleaner, 1, I'm not allowed to use those tools, and 2, for that you need to remove the pads, and I was terrified of accidentally damaging one, as I probably couldn't afford to replace it.
So it was a dry clean for this flute, getting wiped down with dry paper towel both outside and inside, as well as getting dusted with a clean, soft paintbrush in the spots that I couldn't easily reach with the paper towel. With that done, I had to stop procrastinating. It was time to figure out what to do with the pads. I tried shopping around, but
minimum order quantity, 10 pads. That's over budget even before shipping. Minimum order quantity, 100 US international. Oh, Music Medic doesn't have minimum orders. 83 US dollars for shipping? It's 2 pads and a letter. Jail Smith, please. $45 for shipping.
So I sat there and stared at the problem for a while.
As crazy as it is, I think I want to try making my own pad. So a pad is a cardboard backing with a sheet of felt, then with some gold beater skin over the top. Now, obviously going to need to improvise with the gold beater skin, but I have some felt and I can find some cardboard. I mean, it costs nothing, so the worst case scenario is we just waste some time. All right, let's see what happens.
My plan was simple. Trace the existing pad over a piece of cardboard stolen from last night's lasagna box, then cut it out. Then cut out a piece of craft felt I borrowed from my wife, circling it around our cardboard base.
This is so silly. Well, now we need something to act as skin. I have an idea.
I wasn't convinced that the cling wrap would be thick enough to properly act as a pad skin, so I decided to cut out multiple sheets so I could make several layers.
There's no way this works, right?
Using a glue stick, I stuck the cork back into the felt and then the cling wrap around the pad, now able to pull it nice and tight. After repeating for a few layers, I decided to test it on a small piece of tube.
Totally works.
Meaning it was now time to poke a hole in it and test it.
Okay. It works perfectly. I can't believe that. How does that work? Before we move on to making a pad for D sharp though, we need to oil this. This mechanism desperately needs oiling. And obviously I'm not allowed to use key oil, so we need to find another solution. But I think I have one. This, straight from the shed, is engine oil. Specifically, it's lawnmower engine oil and SAE 30, which conveniently happens to be what my lawnmower engine runs on, but is also extremely good for flute mechanisms. It's just the right viscosity. So this is what we're going to use as our improvised key oil.
Using some cotton thread, like you might use in cooking, I cleaned out the old gummy oil and replaced it with our fresh engine oil and reassembled the flute.
It is now day 3 of trying to fix this flute. We've solved the pad problem at least for now. And we have also solved our oil problem thanks to that handy engine oil. But now our problem is that this mechanism no longer has any padding. Previously, this had little pieces of cork to stop the mechanical parts from scratching each other and to make the mechanism quieter. But as you can hear, those have effectively disintegrated, meaning that this metal is now touching itself, and that's a big no-no. So what we're going to try and do is apply this felt sheet to it in such a way that it replaces the cork and softens this mechanical rumbling.
I tried over and over for ages to get the felt stuck on, but nothing I tried. Low temp hot glue gun, high temp hot glue gun, glue stick, none of it worked.
I need to figure out something else.
After so much failure, I was stumped until my wife suggested I use some fabric glue. This stuff was thick, annoyingly sticky, and stank. But thanks to its slow drying time, it worked. I went through and painstakingly glued on felt for every missing piece, then went on to make another pad for the D sharp key. And the next day,
we have a functioning flute. This took so much work and there was a lot of tinkering behind the scenes. In some places the felt was too thick, so I spent time compressing it down. And in other places the felt was too thin, so I put in pieces of tape to bolster it up. The D sharp pad was also much more tricky than the G sharp. Yet we have a working flute using only household tools and materials. But do we have a better flute for all of our effort? Well, now it's time to find out. We'll be comparing these flutes in 4 different categories: acoustics, playing, build quality, and real world value. And I have to admit, after all the work we put into it, I'm hoping this Nikon does well. But we'll have to see. First of all, how do these flutes sound? Well, they're actually surprisingly different. The Moresky is a much brighter flute. I suspect because of how massively open its keys are. That makes it quite good at getting an open, reedy sound, which many people like. However, that brightness also gives it an airy quality, which I found really hard to get rid of and very annoying. In complete contrast, the Nikon is one of the mellowest flutes I've played. Which is better? Well, that depends on your personal taste and context. For playing at home or in small groups, I'd take the Nikon. The dark sound will help it blend in nicely and there's none of that annoying airiness. But in large band context, the Moresky's tone probably suits that a little better. Realistically, nobody will hear its airiness from far away, and its bright tone will help it cut through all of the louder instruments. Tuning though, that's a solid win for the Nikon. Now the Nikon is not perfectly tuned. I mean, no flute is, not even the very best professional models. But what it is consistent. C#5 is quite sharp and D5 is also trending too sharp. But most other notes when played in a scale or jumping between octaves are within 10 cents of each other. In my opinion, that's completely reasonable for a student flute and even actually quite competitive with some of the modern student flutes I've measured. The Moresky, however, is atrocious. Inconsistent is this flute's middle name. Playing an E flat major, your E flat is 17 cents flatter than your F. It's so bad that you could tune your flute perfectly to A4, then play A5 and have it be 13 cents flat. That's going from this, perfectly in tune, to this. Some of you might not think that's so bad, but if you play that in front of a band director with high standards, they're going to start making a grumpy face real fast. And it's not even your fault. We're not expecting perfection, but the Moresky just isn't good enough. Big win for the Nikon. Moving on to playing, this one's quite tricky. The Moresky's mechanism is clunky and I wouldn't want to record with it. It's just so noisy. But the Nikon is mushy and lethargic. It needs proper felt or corks and it really wants to be fully dismantled and properly cleaned up. Give it that proper service though, and I think this would feel 1,000 times better than the Moresky. But as they are now, the Moresky wins it for mechanical feel. Producing sound though, that's a different story. Both of these flutes' biggest weakness is playing with a wide dynamic and tonal range, especially soft or unstable notes. When playing songs with lots of tonal extremes, I really struggled to get out the sounds that I was after. But with the Nikon, I could just barely get close. Where with the Moresky, I just kept missing notes altogether. Similarly, when pushing the flute at its hardest, the Moresky overblew much more easily. But again, inconsistently. This flute's a bit like a car, which drives completely normally. until it suddenly skids off the road and crashes into a tree. On both of these flutes, I think the main culprit is the pads. Both flutes leaked significantly when I tested their sealing. The Nikon's pads are ancient. Let's not forget that 2 of them are literally made of glad wrap. And the Moresky? Well, its pads are just plain bad. Both of these flutes need better pads, which leads us nicely to our next section. Build quality, and specifically tone hole flatness. For those who don't know, tone holes are the holes that the pads cover, and they dictate what quality of pads you can use. Generally, flatter tone holes are more compatible with higher quality pads. And as I just said, both of these flutes' main issues would be solved with some high quality pads. So I ran a test to measure just how flat the tone holes on each of these flutes are. For scale, 0.01 millimeters is the smallest gap that I can measure and what you would expect from a professional flute, with 0.1 millimeters being acceptable. And anything with a tone hole gap bigger than 0.2 millimeters is just automatically disqualified, and I personally can't recommend it. Our Nikon scored a maximum deviation of less than 0.09 millimeters. That's actually really impressive for such an old flute. The same score, in fact, as a Trevor James 10X2, a much newer flute, and one which not that long ago cost about $1,000. The Moresky, however, well, it scored beyond 0.23 millimeters. That's an automatic fail and worse quality than a flute from Aldi. And I think here we get to the real difference between these two flutes. The Nikon is a good quality flute in a bad condition, whereas the Moresky is just a bad flute. And that small detail is massive. In their current states, neither flute is really a good choice for a beginner. But all this Nikon needs to become a genuinely good flute is a proper service and a pad change. Whereas no matter what you do to it, the Moresky will just always be a bad flute. So is it possible to buy a decent flute for under $100? Yes, it is, but I'm not sure you should. It's really difficult, and without flute playing experience, super risky. But if you're a beginner looking to buy your first flute, it isn't hopeless. If you have a teacher, use them and save up just a little more. It's a big challenge to get a good used flute for $100, but for 200, or if you can 300 Australian dollars, it's actually super achievable. Just, and I can't say this enough, use your teacher's experience. If buying a flute in person, ask them to come along and play test it for you. And if buying online, buy from somewhere that offers returns. Then when you get your flute, just have your flute teacher test it well in advance of when the return window ends. But if you don't have a teacher and you're looking for a flute to play at home for fun, well, then you should have a look at this video. It's specifically made for you and explains why you maybe shouldn't buy a metal flute, at least as your first flute. I think you'll really like it, so consider having a look.